Unacceptable behaviour will be dealt with seriously, independently and with effective sanctions. The House asserts its privileges of freedom of speech. That privilege is enjoyed by members of Parliament only in the work and in this House. As private individuals, we are equal under the law with those whom we represent. It is there to ensure that our constituents can be represented by us without fear or favour. It is an obligation upon us all to exercise that privilege responsibly. The Speaker does not have the power to police the accuracy of members' contributions. Therefore, it is incumbent upon members to be accurate in what they say in this House. But if a member is inaccurate by mistake, they should correct that mistake as soon as possible. Members must be mindful of the impact of what they say, not only on other members, but on others who follow our proceedings, and members should be heard courteously, whatever their views. In this place, we are honourable members, and the language we use about each other should reflect that. If a member falls short of the standards expected of us all, there are ways of dealing with that. But this is not by accusations made by sideswipes during questions or debates. And if we fail to treat each other with the respect in the debate that diminishes our work, but it also risks raising the temperature of discussions outside this place, particularly on social media, which already too often descend into online abuse. I want all members and everyone in the parliamentary community to be able to go about their work safely, both online and here in Westminster. The security of this building and those who work here depends upon all of us. We have the duty to be vigilant and to assist those whose job it is to maintain this place as a safe place to work. Before moving to the first business of the new session, I would like to express my very best wishes to all honourable members and all those who work in this House. Right, I have to acquaint the House that this House has the day attended Her Majesty in the House of Peers, and that Her Majesty was pleased to make the most gracious speech from the throne to both Houses of Parliament, of which I have, for greater accuracy, obtained a copy. I shall direct the terms of the speech to be printed in the votes and proceedings. Copies are already available in the vote office. Before I call the mover and the seconder, I want to announce the proposed subjects of debate during the remaining days of the Loyal Address, which are: today, debate on the address; tomorrow, better jobs and fair deal at work; Thursday, a brighter future for the next generation; Monday, safe streets for all; Tuesday, affordable safe housing for all; and Wednesday, NHS and social care. I shall first call Shelley Svara to move, and then Catherine Fletcher to the second the Honourable Address. So Shelley Svara.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that a humble address be presented to Her Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Commons of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, in Parliament assembled, beg leave to offer our humble thanks to Your Majesty for the gracious speech which Your Majesty has addressed to both Houses of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed a great honour and privilege for me and my constituents to move the Loyal Address, especially in this, Her Majesty's 96th year. Her Majesty's commitment and dedication to service of our nation is an example to all of us. Given Her Majesty's age, may I say that by comparison, the rest of us are no more than mid-career. May I also take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to welcome our new colleague to the House, my right honourable member, the member for Hartlepool, with whom I, for one, very much look forward to working with. Mr. Speaker, we meet at a time unprecedented in our history, a time when there is a dark shadow not only our country, but across the globe, as we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Far too many lives have been lost and far too many people have suffered, both in the UK and across the world. When this is over, and it will be, at some point, the family of nations must work together so that if something similar happens again in the future, we are better prepared. The heartbreaking scenes on our television screens from India are a constant reminder that no one is safe until we are all safe. Sadly, there are similar outbreaks in other countries too, such as Nepal, Thailand, and Cambodia. As we continue our own fight against the virus, I'm pleased that we have been able to offer help to others. We were the first country in the world to provide India with practical help, sending vital medical equipment to save precious lives. And it is good that the UK has committed £548 million to the global COVAX initiative. Mr. Speaker, over the past year, new speaking arrangements have meant that often when members put in to speak, they don't get called. Or if they are called, they have no more than about 3 minutes to say their piece. Mindful of the 17 speeches that I was unable to give, Mr. Speaker, and mindful of the broad nature of the gracious speech and the fact that there's no time limit on me today, I would like to put on the record those 17 speeches. On second thoughts, Mr. Speaker, that look in your eye tells me that perhaps I better save it for another day, when I very much hope that I will be called. Today, Mr. Speaker, marks the 11th anniversary of the Conservative Lib Dem coalition being formed in 2010. Since then, the Conservatives have cemented their position as the party of government, Labour as the party of protest, and the Lib Dems as a party that can all gather in this chamber and still maintain social distancing. Mr. Speaker, when the Chief Whip asked me to propose the gracious speech, as well as being hugely honoured, I also felt a sense of humility. All of us have had our own individual journeys in being elected to this House. In my case, I was born in Uganda at a time when Uganda was still part of the British Empire. My family came here in the early 60s, when I was still a young child, unable to speak a word of English. We settled in a deprived area in inner-city Birmingham, where I went to a local primary school, and my father worked as a joiner on building sites. Mr. Speaker, those were tough times. It was legal to discriminate against people on grounds of race. And people did. Racial intolerance and prejudice was rife. And the Prime Minister of the day was Harold Wilson, leading a Labour government. Getting elected to Parliament was not without incident. When I was a candidate in 2000 in Northampton South, the sitting Labour MP, Tony Clark, tried to use my race and my Hindu faith against me in his efforts to get re-elected. Not surprisingly, he was roundly criticised in the national media. On the subject of my faith, Mr. Speaker, there is a memorable moment that I have from when I was a Northern Ireland minister before I resigned over Brexit. I recall one particular visit in Belfast when I was with a group of people and we were discussing each other's faiths. When I mentioned that I was a Hindu, a kindly-looking gentleman smiled and asked me, "Mr. Vara, would that be a Protestant Hindu or a Catholic Hindu?" Fortunately for me, we were distracted by the barman who brought another round of drinks. It has been a real privilege to serve the people of North West Cambridgeshire since 2005. And it is because they selected me that I was able to be the Conservative Party's first non-white minister in the House of Commons and the party's first non-white person to speak from that dispatch box. The point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, is very simple. For someone with my background to be proposing the loyal address shows what a truly great and magnificent country we all live in. North West Cambridgeshire is a relatively new constituency, and I am only its second Member of Parliament. As with all constituencies, it has its high and low points. In fact, on the low side, Home Fen is 7 metres below sea level and is the lowest point in Britain and is in my constituency. On the high side, it's wonderful that Peterborough United, otherwise known as Posh, have just been promoted to the Championship. That being said, my other team, Arsenal, is clearly on a low point, and along with many others, we just live in hope. My constituency is steeped in history. In 969 AD, Ramsey Abbey was founded, and it prospered for many centuries. That is, until news of its wealth reached King Henry VIII and his chief minister Thomas Cromwell, who dissolved the monastery in 1539, and its possessions were claimed by the Treasury. I suppose that was the 16th century precursor to nationalisation. We also have the Bell Inn in Stilton, one of England's oldest and most famous coaching inns, as well as its association with Stilton cheese. It is where the infamous highwayman Dick Turpin is believed to have hidden for 9 weeks while on the run in the 18th century. I'm reliably informed, Mr. Speaker, that his ghost still resides at the inn. He will doubtless be pleased with the government's pledge to give greater protection to tenants. His ghost, however, is not on the electoral roll, and getting an ID card will be a serious problem. But he certainly continues to bring in the tourists. Moving to modern times, there is a strong military presence with RAF Molesworth in the south and RAF Wittering in the north. The size of my constituency is some 300 square miles, with plenty of farms producing the finest food in the country. My constituents are good, decent, hard-working people, ambitious for themselves and their families, and they want a society which has equality of opportunity and which allows them to rise as high as their ability and talent will take them, irrespective of their background. Mr. Speaker, this gracious speech delivers for the people. It is in the tradition of Conservative governments that have always sought to better people's lives, especially the working class and the underprivileged. In the 19th century, the Conservative Lord Shaftesbury was leading the way. He pushed through various pieces of legislation to improve conditions for the mentally ill and children who were forced to work under appalling conditions, as well as championing education for poor children. An interesting point, Mr. Speaker, is that in Shaftesbury's first 3 years in Parliament, he saw 4 Conservative Prime Ministers: Lord Liverpool, George Canning, Viscount Goderich, and the Duke of Wellington. I suspect the 2015 intake can sympathise with the frequent turnaround of Conservative Prime Ministers, although I should make clear that this Prime Minister is not going anywhere for a very, very long time. Disraeli spoke passionately about one-nation conservatism, and Margaret Thatcher encouraged home ownership for people who would otherwise be paying rent all their lives. This gracious speech is for all the 4 nations: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. After the massive financial support during the pandemic, I welcome the measures to create more jobs and drive economic growth, and the drive to build back better and level up opportunities across the country. On the health front, there will be additional funds for the NHS, tailored care for individual patients closer to home, and improved mental health services, and the UK will lead the world in seeking new treatments for diseases such as cancer. Education is for everyone, at all stages of life. That means prioritising the early years, ensuring that those pupils who have missed out, and also ensuring that those pupils who have missed out in the past year will be able to catch up during this parliamentary term. And 11 million adults will be able to benefit from the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. With COP26 in Glasgow later this year, it's great to see that the UK is leading the world in promoting new green initiatives to help safeguard the environment. Protecting its citizens is a key role for any government. I welcome the tough new measures that will be introduced, including the new draft Victims Bill, legislation for greater internet safety, and a fairer immigration system, and tough measures to deal with people smugglers. While speaking on the subject of law and order, Mr. Speaker, it reminds me of the Chief Whip. And earlier today, I was speaking with the Chief Whip, and he basically said to me that if I were to cause a constitutional crisis today, then it would be the Tower of London for me and execution. Actually, Mr. Speaker, my constituency has form with the Tower of London and executions. In 1941, Joseph Jacobs, a German spy, parachuted and landed near Dove House Farm outside Ramsey in my constituency. Unfortunately for him, he broke an ankle and was unable to move. The following morning, he was found by two local farmers who handed him over to the local Home Guard. Jacobs was tried and then executed at the Tower of London. But the significant point is that he was the last person to be executed at the Tower of London. I appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that it is the season of by-elections, but I have no intention of causing a constitutional crisis and adding to the Chief Whip's woes. Turning to the gracious speech again, I was also very pleased with the government's continued support for our armed forces and our strengthening of trade links with the rest of the world as we pursue our interests of global Britain. This gracious speech recognises the work required to deal with the pandemic, and it respects our manifesto and the trust placed in my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and his government by the public. I have known my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, since well before we were elected to this House. I have shared debating platforms with him. I have campaigned with him, and I have campaigned for him. In all those years, one thing is clear. My right honourable friend stands out because he really gets it, and importantly, he delivers. He really understands the working people of this country, what drives them, what are their aspirations for themselves, and what they want for their country. That is why the people trust him. Twice as Mayor of London, leading the Brexit campaign and then delivering on Brexit. And at the last election, they trusted him by giving him the largest Conservative majority since Margaret Thatcher's victory in 1987. And in the same election, the Conservative Party received the largest number of votes ever received by a single British political party in history. Over the past few days, in various electoral contests, that trust in my right honourable friend has been reinforced, including by the recent by-election in Hartlepool, as I referred to my new honourable friend earlier on. Mr. Speaker, this House is at its best when we work together. All of us are in the business of improving the lives of our fellow citizens. We may differ in our approach, but the aim is the same. There are on both sides many members who have experienced inequality, poverty, racism, and much more. So let us recognise that fact and direct our energies less on divisive arguments, less on personal attacks, and more on constructive engagement. That is not to say that we should not have robust and challenging debate in order to deliver the best for the people of our country, whom we are here to serve. As for personal attacks, let us remember what Margaret Thatcher said, that if they attack you personally, it means they have not a single political argument left. At this critical time in our history, it is especially important that we work together to rebuild as the United Kingdom emerges from this dreadful pandemic. There is every reason for optimism, and with this ambitious legislative programme set out in the gracious speech, we have a bright and prosperous future ahead of us. I commend the gracious speech to this House.
I have the pleasure now of calling the seconder, Catherine Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend in this address. He's yet again demonstrated the wisdom, worldview and passion that the people of North West Cambridgeshire have benefited from in many years. It's also an honour to second the humble address to Her Majesty, who, despite a difficult year, well, let's face it, is still flipping ace. Now, proud of Lancashire and South Ribble, I looked up previous speakers in this role, only to discover none from Central Lancashire ever. Other bits of Lancashire pop up, Mr. Speaker. In 1919, we had Lieutenant Commander Percy Dean. In 1924, we had Lord David Balneal. Well, in the 21st century, this untitled and unentitled woman is happy to report back to South Ribble that many things have changed, not least the people that represent you. And as always, I promise to always do my best for you. Now, it's traditional during this address to speak about place and policy, and I will. But I want to focus on the thing these extraordinary times have highlighted as vital to this chamber and to all of us. That thing that we miss so much, people. This COVID pandemic has been awful for all of us. We've lost too many people before their time to a nasty new disease, and to stop that number being much, much higher, we've all, as a country, sacrificed much that is truly important to keep others safe. These empty seats should be occupied with a seething wall of humanity, the bricks from all over our wonderful United Kingdom. But this Queen's speech shows the government has not been solely focused on infection prevention and vaccine rollout. They've kept going with plans to build back better for all of the people that sent us here. And in this place too, we changed our ways to keep people safe, and it's not only easy to do. I mean, think of the poor Chief Whip, the Right Honourable Member for Sherwood, charged with corralling MPs' votes in a socially distanced way. It reminds me, Mr. Speaker, of Alan Rickman in that 90s Robin Hood film. You, 10:30, you, 10:35, and don't bring a friend. Now, I bet the Chief is now regretting this isn't a virtual contribution where he can accidentally stand on the plug. But after these socially distant sacrifices, the people of South Ribble and beyond want this government's action in the measures outlined today that the Chief Whip will steer through Parliament. They are the foundations to truly deliver on our promises for this country. Now, I've detected worries in some areas with money that other parts of the country have their hands out, expecting something for nothing. That's not levelling up in my book. Across swathes of the regions, we've not had attention or the seed investment for decades. We don't want a handout of a shiny white elephant, scheme, keep the natives happy, here today, gone tomorrow. We don't want a fish, and frankly, we're too proud to take it. We want a fishing rod to help us grow our economies to everybody's benefit. In broad strokes, we need better infrastructure, rail, buses, broadband to enable more people to access more jobs. And whilst I don't speak for all, I do speak for many when I say invest in us and we will pay you back with innovation and practical nous, which ultimately delivers tax revenues for our valued services. For example, my brilliant business idea is to export T-shirts with "You're on mute." It'll save everyone a lot of bother if we have to go through this again. It will take time, but history is a long arc. In industrial areas like in the Midlands and the North, we did it before the Second World War. Are you going to bet we can't do it again? The measures today start to address decades of problems, which for many mean it's harder to get private investment. Public investment, pump priming capital to enable global trade and business sector leadership, ultimately creating well-paid jobs. All of us want homes our kids can afford or rent securely, and this government's reforming planning so it's more in the hands of locals, properly agreed in advance. We need to protect our green spaces, have a say in where we build homes, and regenerate disused shops or brownfield sites. We don't need to be sitting around in cold, drafty rooms arguing again and again about overly long documents. So, to all of the people of this Great Isles, North, South, East and West, let me return to the theme of people. Why do I stand here confident today that we'll deliver on our promises given time? Well, as the marvellous returning wearer of the West Midlands, Andy Street, highlighted in his acceptance speech at the weekend, whilst individual people are important, it is teamwork that really makes the difference. So can I take this opportunity to welcome the Right Honourable Member for Hartlepool to this team? Like all of us, when we first get here, I bet her head is spinning. So may I offer her and the thousands of people across the country who lent this team their votes a brief explainer of what you've actually got here. Right, for example, this Queen's speech introduces important measures to protect animal welfare, a theme close to all of our hearts. So let me run with an analogy regarding this place. The 2019 intake have bounded into Westminster politics like spaniels in a wood, enthusiastically sniffing every tree. All glossy-eyed and tongue-flapping, they must appear to more seasoned observers, occasionally above the Westminster bracken, bouncily passionate about the places they're from, and pushing with enthusiastic energy to level up and make lasting change. But, as any upland farmer will tell you on the fell gather, you do need the bouncy pups, but you also need the grey-chinned old dogs, sitting imperiously on the rise. You know, rise in the ground, looking for problems of years past and scanning the horizon for new ones. The slight eye roll, the small aside, my dear, don't do that. It was tried 20 years ago and it failed because. I've had months of work saved by this wisdom, although I will confess surprised that it was ever possible to walk into a village pub and order whilst having 2 loaded shotguns strapped to your back. We also, seriously, we also have those elected more recently, most not really of the Westminster bubble, fiercely proud of place, passionate about their hometowns and their communities, because they live there, it's their homes. We want what you want because we aren't other, we are you, truly part of our places. We have kick-ass ladies, lovely mums, ex-spads, lads, gents, gay and straight, businessmen, servicemen, all available in a variety of colours of melanin. It's the sheer diversity of this team Tory which will strike the Honourable Member for Hartlepool when she takes her place. And I know all of those straight and gay who've worked together will be delighted with the measures announced today to ban the abhorrent practice of conversion therapy, whilst importantly protecting private prayer. Institutional knowledge, coupled with life experience, that's this team Tory. When me and the Red Wall lads go out for a pint after work, they revel in this diversity too. We joke about woke, or whether they're the gammons, representatives of many. Hilarious, I thought. Enjoyed the crack over a beer. All good fun. Up until the Honourable Member for Warrington South pointed out that if they were the conversation's gammons, that made me the ring of pineapple on top. On the pub theme, someone should quickly administer smelling salts to the Right Honourable, to the Secretary of State for Culture and his ministerial colleagues. After the number of messages they received from these benches about the European Super League and its affront to the football pyramid, they definitely need them. And to be clear, the messages were not only received from those colleagues possessed in the correct way of saying Bath, although I do concede that my honourable friend, the member for Orpington, may differ on that topic. So, to the DCMS team, sorry but not sorry, but stopping the anti-football league in its tracks has not distracted the Secretary of State from bringing forward bills to sort out 5G, broadband and preventing online harms. Yeah. Bringing a football view of what's important to this place, Team Tory. But that's not all. The government is a system in its own right, and you need people who have worked in it and know how to get things done. These pure-breed hounds team up with the Heinz 57 mutts to work for you. Ex-insiders and former spads who've offered help and advice without a hint of condescension, but occasionally twitch with a slightly panicky, "Don't do that!" They've already helped get legislation passed to protect children from plastic surgery and women from violence. And it's a two-way street, like when the members for Darlington, Stockton-on-Tees and Redcar explain nicely again what a chicken parmo is and why it's important. In fact, all the Team Tory leadership are investing with practical advice and support because it's the delivery that's important. For example, I think of the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions when faced with another zingy piece of newbie enthusiasm, the deep sigh, the fold of the arms. Well, some of the people in South Ribble have no faith in politicians and say, you're all the same. No, we aren't. What you've got here is true representative democracy, and what this produces is not just passionate government, but effective government from this Team Tory. Right, is there anyone I haven't mildly insulted yet? I'm not that daft. Plus, I've not got the box that she'd need to stand on to properly give me the look. Fine. I know how the criminals running illegal immigration rackets feel. This government has bills here to stop them. And if you commit violent crime, then this Queen's speech means the Home Secretary will throw both the book and the look at you. This Team Tory keeping our communities safer. And think of the poor Prime Minister, heading up this mixed pack, this rabble, the grey-haired, the ginger-brown or curly black-haired, the no-haired, the pineapple blonde, the actually blonde. He crafts his speeches with great learning, but when he says Homer, more likely these days he'll get the answer Simpson from these benches than he'll get classical allusions. Now I know why he plays with his hair so much. It's pure exasperation. Sorry, boss, but we get the general gist, and so do the people we represent. Because what the people of South Ribble want, and the people we represent want, is what the bills in this Queen's speech lays the foundations for. Better infrastructure so we can get to our work quicker, skilled jobs in the green revolution of the 21st century, the ability to get the training we need to access those jobs with a lifetime skills guarantee, levelling up, not taking money from other places, but by investing, so through global trade and key industries we can grow our economies, reinvigorating those places with the practical history and the pride to deliver. Commentators would have these benches at war with each other, different packs with nothing in common. Not from what I've seen, although I don't know whether that sounds familiar to any of the benches opposite. This Team Tory focused on not forgetting anyone, not taking anyone for granted, rubbing along, laughing at each other, helping each other, working together for our whole United Kingdom to level up and build back better. Yeah. It's my privilege, Mr. Speaker, to commend Her Majesty's speech to the House.
The question is that a humble address be presented to Her Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Commons of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, in Parliament assembled, beg leave to offer our humble thanks to your Majesty for the gracious speech which you, Majesty, has addressed to both Houses of Parliament. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I turn to the address, I want to pay tribute to Her Majesty. This was Her Majesty's 67th Queen's speech. At a time of incredible personal loss for Her Majesty, it must have been one of the hardest to deliver as she did this morning. I congratulate the mover and the seconder for what were both fine speeches. The address was moved by the Honourable Member for North West Cambridgeshire. He was typically erudite and engaging, and I shouldn't have been surprised because I'm told he's a former winner of the coveted Rising Star Award at the Conservative Party conference. 1952. Although I think that was in the year 2000. Perhaps his star has risen again today, and as a season ticket holder at Arsenal, I'm very glad to learn that he supports the Reds. I'm also told that he has a black belt in Taekwondo. So I now know who to call on at the next Shadow Cabinet meeting. The seconder of the address, the Honourable Member for South Ribble, showed why she's also tipped as a rising star. She gave a fine and passionate speech. She is surely the only Member of Parliament who's also a qualified safari ranger and has survived once being charged by a rhino. And as her speech showed, she's showed how those skills have transferred nicely to the Westminster jungle. Mr. Speaker, we also remember those members of this House who've passed away in the last session. In April, we lost Cheryl Gillan, who served Cheshire and Amersham with such distinction. I look up because since I've been in this place, I would normally see Cheryl sitting up there on the back bench, just there. As a new backbencher in 2015, I had the privilege of working closely with Cheryl on a cross-party basis. And we quickly developed a mutual respect and friendship. And I know many honourable members would say the same and will remember Cheryl, as I do, with warmth and with affection. Mr. Speaker, it's also a tradition during these debates to welcome new members to this House. So, of course, I congratulate the new member for Hartlepool on her victory. She now has the huge honour of representing that great town. I hope she will forgive me if I say I hope for not too long. I wonder what plan she has for the 40-foot inflatable of the Prime Minister.
It's a let then.
Turning to the address, Mr. Speaker, after a year of sacrifice, this is a seminal moment in our national story. As the Honourable Member for North West Cambridgeshire spoke of the pandemic, let me start with this, because even before the pandemic, Britain needed transformative change to reset our economy, to rebuild our public services, to strengthen our union and our democracy for decades to come. And that is because even before this pandemic, there were 5.7 million people in low pay or insecure work, 4.2 million children growing up in poverty, class sizes that were at their highest for 20 years, 1 in 7 adults unable to get the social care that they need, and Britain with one of the worst levels of regional inequality in Europe. Most shocking of all, Mr. Speaker, life expectancy stalled for the first time in a century. Let that sink in. Life expectancy stalled for the first time in a century. That is the record of the last 10 years. That is the record the Prime Minister is trying to run away from today. And you can see why. You can see why. Because in the last year, the pandemic has brutally exposed the consequences of that decade of neglect. Tragically, the pandemic has showed that if you live in low-quality, overcrowded housing, if you're trapped in insecure work, if you're one of the millions of people who are one paycheck away from hardship, this pandemic will have been harder for you than most. So today we needed a Queen's speech that rose to the scale of the moment, that rewarded the sacrifices of the last year and rebuilt the foundations. But instead, this Queen's speech merely papers over the cracks. It's packed with short-term gimmicks and distant promises. This government's never short of those. But it misses the urgency and the scale of the transformation that's needed in our economy, in our public services and our society. And it lacks the ambition or a plan to achieve it. At the heart of this Queen's speech should have been a jobs plan, a plan to tackle unemployment, particularly the shocking levels of youth unemployment, but also to change how the economy works. That isn't impossible. Just look across the Atlantic. There we see the kind of plan that's needed, a plan for long-term investment, a plan to make the economy more resilient, greener and more dynamic, a plan to halve child poverty, to deliver a fairer tax system, and to grow the economy from the middle out, not the top down. But what do we see on this side of the Atlantic? A Queen's speech that pits regions against each other in a fight for limited funding. An economy still driven by chronic short-termism. A government preparing to take money out of the pockets of working people, and a Chancellor saddling business with debt when they need to invest. This address spoke of plans to increase infrastructure spending. What about time? Britain should be leading the world on investment. But after 11 years of Conservative government, we're 124th out of 186 countries when it comes to capital investment in our economy. And the scale of what was in this address won't turn that around. This Queen's speech should also have provided a plan for better work. For too long, millions of people across Britain have worked longer for lower pay. So where was the employment bill that was promised in the last Queen's speech and repeatedly promised by ministers? Nowhere to be seen. What was needed was a game-changing employment bill to end fire and rehire, to give proper rights to every worker from day one, and to raise the living wage to at least £10 an hour and go further as quickly as possible. That measure alone would have boosted pay for 8.6 million workers. That's what a Labour Queen's speech would have delivered, alongside a green stimulus to create 400,000 jobs and a jobs promise for all 16 to 24-year-olds. This address should also have included a clear long-term recovery plan for our NHS. But with waiting lists at a record high of 4.7 million, what we heard today will come nowhere near the scale of the change needed. And it is unforgivable that there is no clear plan to fix social care. Mr. Speaker, I remind the House that it's now 657 days since the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and said, "We will fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan we have prepared." We have prepared. Yet 657 days on from that promise, what did we hear in this address? Proposals on social care reform will be brought forward. No legislation, no new funding, no details, no timescale. Failure to act for a decade, and it was failure to act for a decade, was bad enough. But failure to act after the pandemic is nothing short of an insult to the whole nation. It's a similar story on skills and education. Mr. Speaker, I care passionately about this. My dad was a tool maker, worked on the factory floor all his life. And I know that it's only through world-class skills training, sustained investment, and by changing the way we think about vocational training that Britain can compete in the 2020s and the 2030s. The Prime Minister's rhetoric on lifetime skills is all very well, but the reality is different. Over the last 10 years, funding on adult education has been slashed by a fifth, and the number of apprentices has fallen by 200,000 in the 3 years to 2020. So we'll judge the government on its record, not on the rhetoric that we hear today. Mr. Speaker, it's the same story on crime and policing. Since 2015, recorded violent crime has doubled. Recorded violent crime has doubled. Antisocial behaviour has gone up in every area of England and Wales, and they call themselves the party of law and order. Violent crime doubled, antisocial behaviour on the up in every area in England and Wales. They've been in government for 11 years. And our courts now have a record backlog, meaning victims waiting years to get justice. Yet the Queen's speech will do nothing to address this. I know there's draft legislation now promised on a victims' law. The promise of a victims' law has been in the last 3 Conservative manifestos. 6 years ago, I introduced a private member's bill for a victims' law with legally enforceable rights. It had cross-party support. There is cross-party support now. So it's not a draft bill we need, it's urgent legislation. The address also promised much on housing, but for many, home ownership is further out of reach than ever. Among the under 45s, home ownership has fallen by 800,000 in the last decade of neglect. House building targets are almost never hit, and rough sleeping has more than doubled since 2010. I see nothing in today's address that will buck that trend, or even attempt to repair the damage of the last decade. If the Prime Minister wanted to act, there is one area where he's guaranteed cross-party support: the cladding scandal. The Grenfell tragedy was 4 years and 3 Queen's speeches ago. Yet thousands of people are still trapped in unsafe buildings. Hundreds of thousands of leaseholders caught up in homes they can't sell or afford. People are facing bankruptcy and great anxiety. And if anybody needed any reminder of the danger of this, look no further than the fire in a block of flats in East London last week. Mr. Speaker, there is no excuse for the Prime Minister's inaction on cladding. That should have been in this address. Mr. Speaker, at a time when the United Kingdom is divided and public trust in our democracy is shaken, this Queen's speech was also an opportunity to rebuild the foundations of our democracy. Instead, what does it do? The Electoral Integrity Bill would make it harder for people to vote. It tramples on civil liberties and it discriminates. The Prime Minister must know that by introducing compulsory voter ID, he will suppress turnout. It will disproportionately impact ethnic minorities and it will weaken our democracy. Labour will have no part in that. We also oppose plans in the Judicial Review Bill to weaken the power of our courts and curtail the right of judicial review. This government simply fails to understand that our independent judiciary are a strength for our country, not a weakness. And where's the legislation to fix the broken lobbying laws? The Prime Minister has chosen instead to put his faith in the 2014 Lobbying Act, the Cameron Act. And where did that end? With a Conservative Prime Minister being paid huge amounts of money by dodgy companies almost immediately after leaving office. Come to think of it, though, given the state of the Prime Minister's current finances, I can see why he's reluctant to change that bit of the legislation. Mr. Speaker, there are parts of the Queen's speech we will look to work with on the government. legislation to ban conversion therapy is long overdue. Conversion therapy is always wrong and indefensible. So we'll look very carefully when legislation is brought forward, which it must be done soon. We will also look carefully at the draft online safety bill. This has been much delayed, and we need urgent and effective legislation. And we're always willing to work on a cross-party basis to end violence against women and girls. We will bring forward our own proposals on this in the coming days, but of course we will look at any legislation the government brings forward in this area. Action on Russian and hostile state interference is also long overdue, and progress has been promised for nearly 2 years. So we will look closely at the promised counter-state threats bill to see if we can work constructively to bring about the change that is needed. But these are small glimmers in a Queen's speech that shows the government still doesn't understand what went wrong in the last decade and has no plan for the next. This is the time for a transformative agenda, to rebuild Britain's foundations after a decade of neglect and a year of national sacrifice, to change the foundation of our economy, to invest in the future, to solve the social care crisis, to clean up our politics, and to clean up the mess this government has created over a decade. But, Mr. Speaker, once again, it's a chance that has been squandered. Thank you.
We now come to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a matter of 5 months, this country has inoculated over 35 million people, 2/3 of the adult population, with the biggest, the fastest programme of mass vaccination in British history, that has helped us to take step after decisive step on our roadmap to freedom. And as life comes back to our great towns and cities, like some speeded up Walt Disney film about the return of spring to the tundra, we can feel the pent-up energy of the UK economy. The suppressed fizz, like a pressurised keg of beer about to be cautiously broached on Monday, Mr. Speaker, in an indoor setting. And I know how hard pubs and restaurants and other businesses have worked to get ready, and everything that they've been through, and I thank them as I thank the whole British people. And I can tell them that the government has been using this time to work flat out to ensure that we can not just bounce back, bounce forward, Mr. Speaker, because this government won't settle for going back to the way things were. The people of this country have shown by their amazing response to COVID that we can do better than that, and the people of this country deserve better than that. And the purpose of this Queen's speech is to take this country forward with superb infrastructure, £640 billion, I can tell the right honourable gentleman opposite, with a new focus on skills, on technology, on gigabit broadband, and by fighting crime, by being tough on crime, by investing in our great public services, above all our NHS, by helping millions of people to realise the dream of home ownership. We intend to unite and level up across the whole of our United Kingdom, because we, One Nation Conservatives, understand this crucial point, that you will find flair and imagination and enthusiasm and genius distributed evenly across this country, while opportunity is not. And we mean to change that, because it is not just a moral and a social disgrace, it's an economic mistake. It's a criminal waste of talent. And though we cannot for one moment minimise the damage that COVID has done, the loss of learning, the NHS backlogs, the courts delays, the massive fiscal consequences, we must use this opportunity to achieve a national recovery so that jabs, jabs, jabs becomes jobs, jobs, jobs. That is our plan, Mr. Speaker, and to address the decades-old problems that have held us back and transform the whole United Kingdom into a stronger, fairer, greener and healthier nation. And that is the central aim of this Queen's speech. I give way with pleasure to my colleague from behind.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the Conservative Party believes in opportunity and equality of opportunity, and our legislative mandate that we have set out today seeks to achieve that, in particular through the skills revolution which will turbocharge our economic recovery?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and one man who I know believes in those in that passion and opportunity and skills is my right honourable friend, the member for North West Cambridgeshire, who proposed so well the loyal address. A kindly man, a kindly man, a lawyer, but unlike some other lawyers in this House, Mr. Speaker, tough on crime. So tough, in fact, that when 3 thugs were so rash as to attack him in Covent Garden, he transformed himself like Hong Kong Fooey and floored all 3 with moves that have earned him, I can tell the right honourable gentleman, not just a black belt, but a blue Peter badge, Mr. Speaker. He has served in many distinguished political roles. He can be proud of his campaigns on behalf of sufferers from breast cancer, on behalf of homeowners who surprise nocturnal intruders with cricket bats, and on behalf of the on behalf of the Cambridgeshire village of Stilton, where the eponymous cheese originated, and where he claimed that local cheesemakers were forbidden from calling the cheese of Stilton Stilton cheese. A bizarre prohibition that he blamed, Mr. Speaker, on Brussels. Understandable. Though I have yet to discover whether he was altogether right in this and whether he has actually solved the problem by getting Brexit done. I think you would agree, Mr. Speaker, he spoke with pungency, with maturity. He spoke for Stilton, and he made a speech in the best traditions of this House. And he was ably seconded. He was ably seconded by my honourable friend, the member for South Ribble, a paleontologist, a biologist, a former safari guide, as the right honourable said, who knows that in any pride of lions, Mr. Speaker, it is the male who tends to occupy the position of titular, of nominal authority, while the most dangerous beast, the prize hunter of the pack, is in fact the lioness. A point that I'm sure the right honourable gentleman bears in mind as he contemplates the member, his friend, the right honourable member for Ashton-under-Lyne, the deputy leader, the shadow's first Secretary of State, the shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and shadow Secretary of State for the future of work. Though the more titles he feeds her, Mr. Speaker, the hungrier I fear she is likely to become. I think so. Judging by her excellent speech, my honourable friend has a long and successful career ahead of her as we work together to deliver for South Ribble and everywhere else in Lancashire and the whole United Kingdom. But as right honourable gentleman said, we are all poorer for the absence of my right honourable friend, the member for Chesham and Amersham. During her long career in this House, Dame Cheryl Gillan passed the Autism Act, which helped many vulnerable people, and served as Secretary of State for Wales. She always stood up for her constituents, including by securing important concessions on their behalf on HS2. Cheryl was both an effective and an extremely popular member of this House, and she was my whip for many years, and she was kindly, she was protective, and supernaturally well informed about my whereabouts, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure I speak for the whole House when I say that we will miss her deeply. I also know that Cheryl was a one-nation believer in the Conservatives as the party of hope and change and opportunity, as my honourable friend has just said, and she therefore would have been as thrilled and as proud as I am to welcome my honourable friend, the member for Hartlepool, to her place and to congratulate her on her victory, and to thank everyone who has placed their trust in this government, many thousands of them, again, for the first time in their history, in their family's history. And across this country, Conservative councillors were elected in areas that my party has seldom had the honour of representing, alongside Conservative mayors, Conservative London Assembly members, Conservative police and crime commissioners, 70% of whom are now Conservative, reflecting the importance we place on fighting crime, and Conservative members of the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senate. And Labour's response, Mr. Speaker, to these events is best summed up by the outgoing leader of Amber Valley Borough Council, who said these immortal words, the outgoing Labour leader: "The voters have let us down. I hope they don't live to regret it." Well, there you go, Mr. Speaker. Yet again, Labour's bonkers solution in the face of any electoral setback is to wish they could dissolve the electorate and call another one. While we get on with our work, taking forward our programme of change and regeneration, filled with obligation towards those we serve, who have every right to hold us to account with the wisdom and the common sense of British people who have always exemplified. We will get on with safeguarding the health of the nation, pressing on full tilt with our vaccination programme until the job is done and our people are as safe as science can make them. We will accelerate the recovery of our public services from the crisis of the last year, investing in our NHS and introducing vital reforms, making it easier for the different arms of the health and care system to work together to provide the best service by means of the Health and Care Bill. And, yes, I can tell the Right Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues, we will bring forward proposals on adult social care so that every person receives the dignity and security they deserve in old age. And, yes, I give way with pleasure to the Honourable Lady.
I'm very grateful. A cross-party select committee report concluded that the government shouldn't be in the business of profiting from miners' pensions, but £4.4 billion has been taken out of the mine workers' pension scheme. Given the Prime Minister made a commitment on this issue during the general election, will he deliver on that promise now and implement the recommendations of the cross-party select committee report?
I'm happy to study the report that she raises, but it is this party and this government that sticks up for people across all walks of life, sticks up for pensioners and sticks up for the low paid. Now, it was very interesting to hear the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite talk about the living wage. Who introduced the living wage, Mr. Speaker? It was the Conservatives. Who raised it by record sums? It was this one nation Conservative government, Mr. Speaker. And we will get on, we will get on with our work. We will build on the expertise, and originality of our scientists, who have allowed Britain to contribute more to the global struggle against COVID than any other comparable country, providing an object lesson in the value of British life sciences. We're determined to harness the concentration of knowledge and excellence in this country to secure Britain's place as a science superpower, so we're going to invest nearly £15 billion in research and development this year alone. The Queen's speech includes a bill to create an advanced research and invention agency charged with backing scientific discovery in new ways and ensuring that the breakthroughs of the future happen here in the UK, as they have so repeatedly in the past. And with those breakthroughs will come jobs and opportunities and new enterprises in fields that we can at present scarcely imagine. And it is our levelling up mission to spread those jobs across the UK. And I give way to the Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
I'm very grateful for Prime Minister giving way. On behalf of bereaved families across the country, will the Prime Minister tell this House if, during this session of Parliament, he will set up the public inquiry into the government's handling of COVID that he promised me in this House last June?
I can certainly say that we will do that within this session, Mr. Speaker. Yes, that's absolutely. And I've made that clear before. We will. I do believe that it's essential that we have a full, proper public inquiry into the COVID pandemic, and I've been clear with the House before. We will establish a new. No, thank you. We will establish, Mr. Speaker, a new UK infrastructure bank headquartered in Leeds with £40 billion to invest as part of the greatest renewal of British national infrastructure since the Victorian age. And we will ensure that the British people derive maximum benefit from the £300 billion of their money that the government spends every year on public procurement by creating a wholly new system consolidating 350 separate regulations into one regime so that public investment can be even more effective as an instrument for levelling up the country. We will use the sovereignty we've regained from the European Union to establish at least 8 free ports, including in Teesside. And now that we're free, Mr. Speaker, of EU state aid rules, the Queen's speech proposes a new national subsidy system, allowing the government and the devolved, I'm going to give you a minute to my honourable friend behind me, allowing the government and the devolved administrations to spur the creation of jobs and businesses. And I give way with pleasure.
You are most gracious. Brexit has created huge opportunities in the form of free ports. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that free ports in places like Anglesey will turbocharge the economy and give us thousands of jobs, investment and opportunity across the UK in places where it's desperately needed?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is completely right. And Anglesey could have no more powerful or effective champion, I may say, not just on the matter of free ports, but also nuclear power as well, which I knew, which was probably the other thing she was. No, Mr. Speaker, I will not take an intervention from the General Opposite just yet. We will use the powers we've recovered from the EU to strengthen our borders and reform the asylum system, cracking down on the criminal gangs which profit from trafficking in human beings, by ensuring for the first time that the fact of whether people have entered the UK legally or illegally will have an impact on their asylum claim, Mr. Speaker. And at the same time, we will uphold Britain's great tradition of providing a haven for those facing persecution and repression, opening our arms to our friends, the British nationals in Hong Kong, safe in the knowledge that our government has recaptured overall power to control our borders. And as the compassionate one nation Conservative government, we know that crime falls disproportionately on the poorest and the most deprived parts of our country and our communities. And that's why the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill in the Queen's speech will end the outrageous injustice, which he voted against, of serious sexual violent offenders being automatically released halfway through a standard sentence of between 4 and 7 years. This bill will support our police with new powers to deal with highly disruptive protests and double, if he opposes that, he can let me know. Does he? Perhaps he'd like to tell me whether he opposes that.
Perhaps the Prime Minister can answer this. For the last 3 Tory manifestos, for every humble address since 2016, his government has promised a victims' bill. It is in the humble address again, and we are very grateful for it. I hope, can he assure us it will be delivered this year? It has not been published. There has been no details of what will be in it. We hear rumours it will just put a code of conduct onto statute, but will he promise that he will take the Labour approach of going much further, empowering victims, giving rights to victims that are enforceable by law, and there will be consequence for those in the criminal justice system that don't uphold them? Will he promise that?
Mr. Speaker, we will not only stick up for victims, but for the first time, which Labour failed to do in all their years in office, Mr. Speaker, just as they failed, by the way, to do anything at all about social care. There he is berating the government about social care. They did nothing at all for 13 years in office. We will take the interests of victims to heart. We will address that. But I hope that he will also support our proposals to to increase sentences for serious sexual and violent offences, which he voted against. And I hope that Labour will support our proposals to double the maximum sentence for assault on emergency workers, Mr. Speaker. We will work to improve our neighbourhoods by making them safer, and we will help people to achieve the dream of home ownership, not just with 95% mortgages, Mr. Speaker, but by modernising the planning system, most of which remains unchanged since the 1940s. We will introduce a lifetime skills guarantee, as several of my colleagues have already pointed out, allowing anyone to train and retrain and acquire new expertise whenever they wish. And if the honourable gentleman opposite wants to dispute the merits of that proposal, let him do so now.
Speaker, I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way, and he's lauding the merits of home ownership. What is the point and the merits of home ownership when those homeowners are leaseholders who are trapped because the government refuses to help them with any kind of fire safety measures that weren't their fault in the first place?
Mr. Speaker, we have put £5 billion into supporting homeowners who face the problems of cladding over 18 metres, and we're supporting leaseholders at every level. This is a massive problem which the government is undertaking to deal with all our resources. But I can tell him, if he's now saying that the Labour Party is in favour of home ownership, Mr. Speaker, that's the first time I've heard of it. They are resolutely opposed to measures that allow people to own their own homes. They have been ever since I've been in politics, and that is one of the crucial differences between them and us. And I hoped actually he was going to support our measures to allow people to train and retrain and acquire new skills. Everything we do, Mr. Speaker, will be done as one united kingdom, combining the genius of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, joined together by blood and family, tradition and history, into the most successful political, economic and social union the world has ever known. In all its centuries, the union has seldom proved its worth more emphatically than during this pandemic, when the United Kingdom, the fifth biggest economy in the world, had the power to invest over £407 billion to protect jobs and livelihoods and businesses everywhere in these islands, including 1 in 3 jobs in Scotland, safeguarded by the combined resources of Her Majesty's Treasury under my right honourable friend, the Chancellor. Now, as we build back better, greener and fairer, we shall benefit as one United Kingdom from the free trade agreements we have regained the power to sign, opening up new markets across the world. Only last week, I agreed an enhanced trade partnership with the Prime Minister of India, covering £1 billion of trade and investment and creating over 6,500 jobs across the UK. As one United Kingdom, we will be a force for good in the world, leading the campaign at next month's G7 summit in Cornwall for global vaccination, education for girls and action on climate change. As one United Kingdom, we will host the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow and help to rally ever more countries to follow our example and pledge to achieve net zero by 2050. As one United Kingdom, we will continue with ever greater intensity to connect talent with opportunity, mobilising the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the British people to achieve their full potential at last. It is an enormous task, a task made both more difficult by the pandemic and yet more urgent. But it is the right task for this country now. I know that the country can achieve it, and this Queen's speech provides us, Mr. Speaker, with the essential tools to do it, and I commend this Queen's speech to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank Her Majesty for coming to the Houses of Parliament today to deliver the humble address, and of course our thoughts remain with her, given the sad passing of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, some weeks ago. And can I also welcome the new member for Hartlepool to her place this afternoon. It was a joy to hear the motion being proposed by the member for North West Cambridgeshire. I think he knows I have some friendship with him. He and I served together when he was the Pensions Minister 6 years ago and I was the SNP Pensions spokesperson. I can remember the first meeting that we had in his office and the look of horror on his face when we were met by the Baroness Altman. And when he said to me, "Good grief, are the two of you friends?" And of course we were, but I'm delighted to say that we had a very warm and cordial relationship when he was the Minister and we worked together over a number of matters. He delivered a typically erudite, humorous, passionate speech over the course of this afternoon, and I can't help thinking that as much as anything else was an application for a job back in government again, if the Prime Minister has been listening to him. Can I also thank the Honourable Member for South Ribble for what was a tour de force and a ramble round the Tory benches that we had from her this afternoon. I'm sure too that she will have an outstanding career as a Member of Parliament on the Tory benches. Mr. Speaker, this new session of the Westminster Parliament comes at a time of huge challenge and crisis, but is equally a time of fundamental choice for people right across these islands. The COVID pandemic has seen our world rapidly change over the course of the last year. This year and into the future, people's clear desire and demand is that we change things profoundly and change them for the better. And that, Mr. Speaker, is exactly why the electoral results over the course of the last week represent such a historic and defining moment. Because last Thursday, the people of Scotland turned out in record numbers, the highest turnout that we have seen at a Scottish parliamentary election, to re-elect the SNP government for a fourth consecutive term. Hear, hear. They turned out to support that message of hope and change, so brilliantly characterised by our First Minister. It was an election that broke nearly every record in the book. And it is a result that will continue to reverberate. That electoral earthquake now opens the democratic path that will shape Scotland's future. And let's be clear, that future will be Scotland's hands, and it will be the people's choice, and nobody else.
For giving way, he mentions a record-breaking election. He hasn't mentioned, in fact, it was the Scottish Conservatives' record-breaking election with more votes for the Scottish Conservatives than at any time in the history of devolution, making us the definite party of the main opposition in Scotland. He talks about Scotland's choice, but 4 days before the election on Thursday, the First Minister of Scotland was on the BBC saying that this was not an election about independence. Barely hours after the polls closed, she was calling for another referendum. I asked the right honourable gentleman, why did she mislead the Scottish people 4 days before we went to the polls?
Answer that. I have to say, I'm disappointed in the honourable gentleman, and I say to him that it's going to be important over the course of the coming weeks and months that we can debate properly what the choices are for the future of Scotland. And I make this offer to him, that all of us that have Scotland's interests at heart should be able to debate rationally and honestly what those choices are. Let's respect the electorate in doing that. Mr. Speaker, I think everybody knows that the Scottish National Party is the party of independence. And everybody knows, Mr. Speaker, without prevarication, without doubt, that the SNP stood on a very clear manifesto commitment of giving the people of Scotland that choice to have that debate and a say in their future. It was clearly contained within our manifesto that we said to the people of Scotland that put us back into government again, allow us to lead the country through the pandemic. But the promise that we made to the people of Scotland was that if they voted for us in that election, if they delivered a majority for independence in that Parliament, that nobody, not the Prime Minister, and certainly not the member for West Aberdeenshire, will stop the people of Scotland having their democratic choice. And I say to him that he has to recognise what happened. And let's look at this in the context that Westminster looks at it at, on the basis of the first-past-the-post system. Now, we don't support it. We support proportional representation. But, Mr. Speaker, there are 73 first-past-the-post constituencies in the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish National Party won 62 of them. We won 85% of the constituencies on 48% of the vote. The highest number of constituencies ever won by any party. The highest share of the vote ever won by any party. And for the Conservatives to try and argue that black is white, that they've won the election, if you listen to the honourable gentleman, then frankly, Mr. Speaker, nothing can be further from the truth. Because the truth is, the ambition of the Conservative Party in Scotland is to be in opposition. The ambition of the Scottish National Party is to govern and to take our people to independence.
If we're talking about victories and that, could he just add into his speech a little bit of a reference to Wales? And in particular, the 19% swing to Labour from Plaid Cymru in the Rhondda, and the fact that Adam Price completely overplayed his hand. Nationalism is a false chimera. I suppose every chimera is false. He shouldn't put all his trust in one line.
Look, I say to the honourable gentleman that I believe the people in Wales should determine their own destiny. And of course, I congratulate the Labour Party in Wales in going back into government, because that is the right thing to do. But I say to this House, and I say to this Prime Minister, that we were told in 2014, when we had the independence referendum, that we would be respected in this House, that we were to lead the United Kingdom. And I say to the Prime Minister, and I say to everybody else in this House, that you cannot deny democracy. You cannot deny the right to the people of Scotland that have voted in 72 members of the Scottish Parliament that had a commitment of delivering an independence referendum. And I hear people saying 2014. But the point is, we were told in 2014 that if we stayed in the United Kingdom, then our rights as EU citizens would be respected. We were told that Scotland was to be respected. And we know what happened. In the Brexit referendum in 2016, Scotland voted by 62% to stay in the European Union. And we were simply told by this House, well, tough. There is nothing that we're going to do for you. You're going to lose that access to the single market. You're going to lose that access that you have craved. You're going to lose that right that you have had to work and live and get an education in Europe because the Prime Minister and the Conservative government are going to decide for the people of Scotland. Well, the people of Scotland have given their verdict on that because the message is very clear that there is a mandate for an independence referendum. And let me put this House on notice that it's the people of Scotland and our Parliament that will determine when that independence referendum will take place. And just, I hear the mocking which is going on. But just, we didn't win. We didn't win. Can you believe it? You know what? We've just taken 2 seats from the Conservatives in the election. The seat of Edinburgh Central and the seat of Ayr. I don't know what you call winning, when by the Westminster rules you win 62 of the 73 seats, and by the warped logic of Conservative backbenchers, we haven't won. It's a parallel universe that the honourable member lives in, if that's what she believes. And if
I'm most grateful to the honourable member. I'm sure that he will join in me in wondering how this House will hold Welsh Labour to account in having moved its manifesto so much that they can talk about parking their tanks on Plaid Cymru's lawn. But Plaid Cymru made that lawn.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for that intervention, and hopefully the light that we have shone in Scotland gives an example to the people of Wales and Plaid Cymru that they should follow us and find their way back into Europe as an independent country. Mr. Speaker, putting on the record the scale of the SNP victory and achievement, putting on the record the verdict of the Scottish people, is especially important given today's context. Because today, this Tory government puts forward its policy programme for this new session. The Prime Minister gained the authority and the mandate to do so when his party was re-elected to office in 2019. Re-elected, I might add, with a significantly smaller vote share than was achieved by the SNP in Scotland last week. In that election, the Prime Minister put forward a manifesto with the policies he said he and his party would implement. Those of us on the opposition benches have the right to oppose many of these policies, and we will do so and do so forcibly. But if the Prime Minister secures a majority in this House, that mandate from the manifesto will be legally implemented. It is a pretty fundamental principle and should be simply a simple concept. It's called parliamentary democracy. And yet, Mr. Speaker, a few short days after a landslide victory in Scotland, it is that very basic principle of democracy, that right of governments to propose and implement their manifesto commitments, that this Tory government is threatening to undermine. By doing so, they are threatening a new level, a new low level of hypocrisy and of disrespect. The defeated Scottish Tory leader has said that the SNP seeking to implement a fundamental manifesto promise, a commitment to give our people a choice of our own future, should be treated as illegal. Before the results had even been completed, the Prime Minister himself told his favourite newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, that he would try to block a post-pandemic independence referendum. So, today of all days, I would genuinely urge the Prime Minister and his government to think again. Now, I know he's looking away and looking disinterested, but this is important. Because this is about democracy, Prime Minister. This is about the rights of people. And you know, people will be watching this. and they can hear Conservative MPs laughing about our desire to make sure that democracy is deliverable. And that's the contempt, Mr. Speaker, that I have talked about. Let me say to the Prime Minister that any confrontation will not be with the SNP. If they seek to deny Scottish democracy, their confrontation will be with the people of Scotland. And secondly, the Prime Minister needs to reflect on this reality. A fight with democracy is a fight he will never, not ever win. You know, I know the Prime Minister doesn't want to see this, hear this, but he might try and show some degree of interest as to what is going on, because what we're seeing is the contempt that we have for Scotland from this government. Mr. Speaker, today's Queen's speech and this Tory policy programme also emphasises another important point. Last week's elections brought into stark focus the chasm in the political choices being made in different parts of the United Kingdom. Because the differing values and leadership between the Prime Minister and our First Minister, and the tale of two governments in London and in Edinburgh, has crystallised that choice of two futures. Time and time again, the majority of people in Scotland back a progressive, inclusive, outward-looking vision for the future of our nation. This has been our direction of travel since we gained some powers through devolution. And yet, in this Westminster Parliament, we are facing many more years of right-wing, Brexit-obsessed Tory governments that we didn't vote for, taking us in a direction that we haven't chosen. That clear divergence in political direction is simply not sustainable. Scotland has chosen a different path. And as we look beyond the pandemic and build the recovery, our alternative to these Tory values and their vision was set out in our manifesto. Unlike this Tory government, the SNP manifesto has the support of the Scottish people. The policy programme the SNP put before the people of Scotland will move our country forward, making it fairer, greener and more prosperous. The First Minister is already back at work and getting on with the job. Our alternative to this Queen's speech is already in action. With health and social care services being one on the front line of the pandemic, this new elected SNP government will now deliver a 20% increase in frontline NHS spending, a total of £2.5 billion. And while this Tory government dithers and delays on reforms to social care, the new SNP government will move to establish a national care service backed by a 25% increase in social care investment, while the Conservatives dither the SNP government in Edinburgh acts. And this will include significant investment in the staff themselves. And the Tories continue to laugh while we talk about investment in NHS. Because unlike the insult of a 1% offered by the Tories, in Scotland, NHS staff have been offered an average Prime Minister, of a 4% pay increase. And the new National Care Service, backed by £800 million, will enable the government to offer a national living wage to all care staff. It's little wonder the Prime Minister hangs his head in shame, and so, Mr. Speaker, so he should. To invest in the next generation, the SNP government will invest over £1 billion over the next Parliament to close the school attainment gap and to recruit 3,500 additional teachers and classroom assistants. You know, I don't think if the honourable member for West Aberdeenshire was back in school, he would behave the way he is behaving in this House. He really ought to calm down. This Tory government has to be shamed by a professional footballer into providing free school meals. In contrast, the Scottish Government will get on with providing free school breakfast and lunches to every primary school pupil year-round, and a device for every child in Scotland to get online. For families, the SNP Scottish Government will build a wraparound childcare system to help support working parents, with the least well-off families paying nothing. And whilst this Tory Government threatens to rip away the lifeline of a £20 a week uplift to universal credit, the new SNP government will double the game-changing Scottish child payment over the lifetime of their Parliament. That's a Scottish government delivering on the people's priorities. Mr. Speaker, the The context of the COVID crisis makes the choices made now all the more critical. Because in seeking to build economic recovery in the aftermath of this pandemic, it is vital that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. Instead, though, the budget in March and this Queen's speech is clearly laying the grounds for more Tory austerity and more Tory cuts. And it is also important to point out that no party and no government who forced through a job-destroying Brexit in the middle of a pandemic can credibly claim to be focused on recovery. With the powers we have, the SNP Scottish Government is doing everything it can to mitigate against this damage and seeking to protect our businesses. We believe a fair recovery should follow the example of the Biden administration. It must be investment-led. At the centre of the SNP's recovery plans are an economic transformation which would have fair work and the climate emergency at its heart. This will include an investment of £500 million to support new jobs and to retain people for the jobs of the future, as well as funding the young person's guarantee of a university, college, apprenticeship, training place or a job for every young person that wants it. The SNP Government will also embark on a massive programme of capital investment. Over £33 billion will be invested over the next 5 years in our national infrastructure, directly supporting 45,000 jobs. And an SNP Government will deliver a further 100,000 homes by 2032, with investment of £3.5 billion over this Parliament, which will support 14,000 jobs a year. Mr Speaker, ahead of the COP26 conference in Glasgow in November, enhancing and expanding our world-leading climate action policies will be a key priority. The SNP Government will deliver a green transport revolution by providing free bikes to all school-aged children who can't afford them, remove the majority of fossil fuel buses from public transport, ramp up investment in active travel and bring ScotRail into public ownership with the aim of decarbonising the rail network by 2035. There is also a commitment to decarbonising the heating of 1 million homes by 2030.